Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the HeadStart Podcast. My name is Richard Anderson and I'm the digital comms lead for HeadStart Wolverhampton, and today I'm really pleased to be joined by Jaivant Patel. Jaivant is an independent dance artist, cultural producer, choreographer and creative consultant. He also delivers community-based dance classes under the Jaivant Dance, a non-profit organisation under the umbrella of Jaivant Patel Dance. He's a member of the Gujarati community in Wolverhampton and a Hindu, and he's also an openly homosexual man in a community where that is maybe unusual. Good afternoon, Jay, and Thanks so much for speaking to us today. Could you just break down for us some of the terms and ideas in that little bio for people who aren't familiar? So what does it mean to be a member of the Gujarati community?
So, I suppose I need to start from where my parents and grandparents first came to the country. So they were part of the Gujarati diaspora, as I like to call it, who emigrated from Africa, Kenya specifically, to the UK during the time when the Indian community were leaving Africa in droves due to the regime that was happening there, because they had to leave basically. So they chose to settle here. I think when they arrived in the late 60s, the Gujarati community was very, very small. And then it's grown to be one of the biggest communities in the UK. And a lot of the Gujarati community who first came to the country came via the Midlands, so via Birmingham, Leicester, and even Wolverhampton. I've always been a member of the community from a young age, and it's a really dynamic community. I feel in Wolverhampton, and it's great.
And the majority of people in the Gujarati community are Hindus.
Yes. And
what are the main principles of Hinduism, again, for people who maybe aren't familiar with Hinduism as a religion? I know it's the third biggest religion in the world. Yes. It's the oldest religion in the world, sort of 3,000 years or more in terms of its origins. But what are the main principles of the religion? Because in a minute we're going to start sort of digging into maybe what the interaction is between those principles and feelings about mental health or about sexuality. So let's just lay that out.
I think there are very many beliefs about or around what the Hindu religion is or can be. I think for me, I've always stuck to the principle that it is more about a way of life. It's really about how you navigate, I think, and I believe, your life here on this earth, which is what we describe as materialistic. There is a spiritual and a higher plane that you attain to reach, which is or can be referred to as moksha. I think that's the simplest way to describe it. It is a way of life. It's about how you behave, about how you conduct yourself, and how you be the best possible person you can be, with the foundation of a belief in God.
And for people who maybe whose understanding of Hinduism maybe only comes from, I don't know, school RE classes. Yeah. People will be familiar with the idea, obviously, that it's a polytheistic religion, lots and lots of gods, a huge diversity of gods. But I think that what separates Hinduism is that it doesn't have a sort of a singular doctrine that sits within it in a way that might be true of I suppose the other two huge religions in the world, Christianity and Islam. There isn't sort of a singular set of beliefs that can identify someone as a Hindu. That relates to this idea, it's a way of life. There's not sort of a singular book or a singular prophet whose teachings and beliefs are held as being sacrosanct and in no way or infallible.
I think it's important to note here that many people might view the Hindu religion as being one of many gods. And whilst I believe that that is true, I also am of the belief that all those gods are a facet of one God, of which has had many incarnations or of which has got many representations. They all stem from one belief or one energy, as we like to call it.
So there is a sort of unifying spiritual force that sits within Hindu concepts.
Again, because there are so many doctrines and because there are so many beliefs that some Hindus may challenge me on that.
And you wouldn't want to speak for all those beliefs.
No.
You have your own set of beliefs, but within that.
Absolutely.
Overview. Yeah. So to me, that when we're talking about things like mental health and maybe attitudes towards sexuality, as a religion, Hinduism sounds like almost an ideal place for a diversity of opinions to exist as a religion about what it means to be homosexual or to be transgender, or what it means maybe to have a mental health condition. It feels like a more diverse, potentially more accepting place than we might consider, say, Christianity or Islam to be. Do you sort of agree with that as a perception or not?
I think it's very important to note, and we'll probably end up touching on this a lot later in the interview or the podcast, and that's I believe that religion, faith, and culture or society are two very different things, and it's about understanding that and what that forms for yourself. I think it's also important to note that Hinduism has always, I believe, been accepting of the LGBT community, but because of the colonization of India by the British during the time, I think the British ruled India for something like 200 to 300 years, something like that.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of what I like to refer to as whitewashing in terms of how Victorian ideals or Christian beliefs were imposed upon the country to be seen to be a model of the empire, if you like. I mean, if you think, I might be going off on a tangent there, but if you think about the way Buddhism is today, Buddhism is very accepting of the LGBT community and what that means. And funny enough, Buddhism is a shoot-off, if you like, of Hinduism, because one of the 10 incarnations of Vishnu was actually Buddha himself.
Yeah.
So, the teachings of Hinduism teach you to always not judge somebody else. They teach you that you are to be accepting of everybody. And first and foremost, I think we place a lot of gender stereotypes and notions on the body, which is, again, is a very Christian thing to do about roles, which doesn't necessarily exist set in stone within the Hindu religion. There is guidance, but it's not set in stone. And I think that conformity has really had an effect on how the religion sees the LGBT community, because one of the fundamental teachings of Hinduism is the fact that this body is not a body. This body is a soul, and it houses that soul. Therefore, the soul is genderless. Something very similar to kind of the Sikh beliefs and the principles. So I think throughout the years of the mind being conditioned to think otherwise, the Indian community now have an automatic aversion, maybe, or an uncomfortableness about the LGBT community and being Indian and gay, and that not being accepted. But there are stories and there are theories, if you like, that contradict that, which is a lot of what I'm exploring my upcoming tour, which I think we'll talk about later.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit later about the way that you're using dance to explore some of these issues.
Yeah.
So there's definitely this sort of sense that's coming across that what you have with Hinduism is that there's the religion itself, that the teachings of the religion and the writings in the religion are very diverse and very accepting, but there was this sort of Victorian overlay that was placed over it by the British when they arrived in India. And that led to a cultural situation in which for generations of Indians there wasn't an acceptance of that diversity, because that culture was, whether intentionally or otherwise, imposed upon them by the British being in that country.
I think the easiest example for me to use to kind of put into perspective what I'm talking about is this ideal about, if you look at the temple carvings within India and all throughout India, they depict the Kama Sutra explicitly. But yet the country and the diaspora of India has a very uncomfortable response to, and when talking about the Kama Sutra, which is part of its legacy. And I think that's a really interesting juxtaposition, if you like. And the Hindu religion is I see as, because I see it as a way of life, a lot of its teachings and a lot of its many theories I see as guidance.
When we were talking in advance of recording this, you specifically said that at a point where you were maybe really struggling with your sexuality and a point where you were really struggling with your mental health, as a direct consequence of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the things that you did was that you went back to learning and acquiring a deep understanding of the writings that form the bedrock of the religion. So you tried to strip away some of this cultural layer, this imposed cultural layer, as we've described, and go back to those initial writings and those initial traditions as a way of sort of improving your own well-being. Because you realised that actually the person that you were did sit happily within that religion. Where maybe it didn't sit happily was within that cultural layer that had been squashing down, repressing those religious ideas.
I think it's important to kind of say when I referred to struggling about my sexuality, it was never about
am I gay or am I not
absolutely,
gay?
I've always been fortunate, and I understand not many others are, that I never questioned my sexuality. I struggled with coming to terms with it in terms of being comfortable enough to be open about that. And that's when I went back specifically to the teachings, and I started to kind of formulate an understanding, was there still a place for me within this world of faith? Because my faith is very important to me, which has been instilled in me by my grandma, you know, who brought me up to believe within these kind of ideology. So I went back and I read the Bhagavad Gita, but I didn't read it in English because I felt it may get lost in translation. I read it within my own language, which is Gujarati. And whilst I didn't understand everything at any one point, there were certain parts of the book that really came out and came alive to me. And I believe that unconsciously it changed my outlook on life and how I was in terms of being more comfortable with saying, yes, I am a gay man, although I didn't go out shouting it from the rooftops. But I was able to, in a way, I would say,
belong within the faith.
Belong, but in a way that I was able to not defend, but protect myself. Because if anybody questioned me, I was able to, having done my bit of research in inverted brackets, I was able to kind of relay certain parts
with
of
knowledge
the
and with understanding and with an educated voice as to where.
And I think it's really important to kind of say here that the Bhagavad Gita isn't a religious text. In that it doesn't dictate how you should lead your life as a Hindu. It dictates, or it gives you guidance, should I say, as to how you should live your life as a human being. And it talks about other religions within the book, and it talks about the the ideal way for reaching that spiritual plane through its own guidance, again, I would say. And the brilliant thing about the Gita is that every time you read it, and I try and read it yearly, at least once, is it makes relevant what's going on in your life at that moment in time.
Yes.
And it brings that into perspective, and it makes you see a way forward, just simply through the words and its
what
teachings.
are Gujarati attitudes to, I mean, if we broaden it out from, if we move away from LGBT issues, what are Gujarati or Hindu attitudes towards mental health challenges more generally, do you think?
I think they are getting better. I think people are talking a lot more in terms of tackling mental health issues. But you know, I think this is a really interesting subject because, again, it refers back to a colonialist attitude towards mental health. You know, as we know, it was a very... The British have got, and I say this, being British myself, the British have got...
We're not going to take offence, no.
The British...
I think we appreciate that maybe some of the things that our ancestors did were less than wonderful in this regard.
So the British have a stereotypical history of being very uptight about things in general.
Probably still are, yeah.
So mental health wasn't something that was spoken about kind of in Victorian Georgian times, around the time when kind of the British were still in India ruling.
And powerful, yeah.
And empire, exactly. And I think that had a really big effect on Indian attitudes towards mental health. And when the diaspora emigrated to these countries, they took that with them because they didn't know what else. They didn't know anything else. And I think that now when the Western world is now taking on Eastern doctrines in terms of tackling mental health, like yoga, like meditation,
mindfulness,
all that kind of stuff, that is all a very Indian or an Eastern philosophy, which is actually spoken about kind of within the doctrines of the
although I think they are slightly separate, aren't they? Because I think what we've tended to do is take those on as practical tools of support, but haven't taken them on in the sense of them fundamentally changing our attitudes to the underlying issue. So I think that something like mindfulness or something like meditation is being used by a huge number of people. I don't think many people now are against that as a principle, but that we still have huge stigma sitting over some mental health issues.
Yeah, but what I'm saying to you is that kind of I would be really interested to see what the mental health and the attitudes of stigma around that stigma, would be pre-colonial rule as opposed to how they are now.
Yes.
So it's just really that full circle is really quite interesting for me, how kind of Western attitudes towards tackling mental health have gone back to the East in terms of principles around
and tools to care for ourselves and improve our own well-being.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting how I think that's now having an impact, full circle again on the South Asian community. I mean, for example, if I can just speak a moment in terms of the LGBT community, which may lead on to your next question, I don't know, is that it's really interesting how when the South Asian community came to this country and they carried that stigma with them and taught that to the next generations that came about, they were stepping into a country which had decriminalised homosexuality in the 50s.
Yeah.
But yet they still carry that stigma with them. And I think that stigma resonated with the rest of the UK because it was still an unconscious bias.
And that was that's written large by the political history of India itself, because homosexuality in India was only decriminalised in 2009, is that right?
So that leads
and then it was reversed again in 2012, and it's only been re-reversed and re-legalised as of earlier this year.
But I think that journey is really important to note, because I think that now that it has, I think the reason why it wasn't in 2009, 2012 was because it didn't the verdict wasn't passed through the Supreme Court, and it has been now passed through the Supreme Court, so it's a law now.
Yes.
But I think it's really interesting how, and I've seen attitudes have changed in this country from my own community because of seeing that, but not through the British mainstream news or the British mainstream tabloids. It's happened simply through the Sky channels.
So it's interesting. So you're saying that sort of the Gujarati community in
not just the Gujarati community,
the wider South Asian community is sitting in this country but paying attention, and actually rulings by the Indian Supreme Court in Delhi are changing or supporting a change in attitudes here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there is that very tight connection between here
those
and
Sky channels, for example, in a strange way, is a link home.
Yes.
And is a link to heritage, which is quite interesting. But I think the attitudes towards the LGBT community in India has far more moved on over the years compared to the communities in the UK.
That's interesting.
Especially kind of in the big cities and the big suburbs like Delhi and Mumbai, and the big cities. Because I have friends from the arts world and from personal connections in India on Facebook, for example. And when the verdict was going through, there was an awful lot of support.
Yes.
From non-LGBT people for the LGBT community, including kind of the Bollywood stars, if you like, a film, and the celebrities that are there.
Do you think that's just an issue of scale? I mean, is it the case, do you think, therefore, that you end up with, because those cities are so huge and that society is so huge in India, that this diversity is able to these different ideas are able to circulate and spread and be discussed. But actually, if you're in a Gujarati, for example, community in the UK, it tends to be quite a tight, insular sort of community. And it's a little bit of a sort of it's like everyone's listening just within that circle. No one's really listening to what's happening outside that bubble. So it's almost, it's a bit like being in a, I don't know, Donald Trump supporting Facebook group. Is that if the only views you're hearing?
Can we not talk about Donald Trump, please?
No. But if the only views you're hearing are views which are similar to your own, and you're in quite a tightly knit community, that there's a danger that, more than a danger, that other ideas are slow to penetrate into that community. Whereas in India itself, where it's just so huge, there's so much happening. It's it's going through very, very rapid change in many ways, economically, culturally.
I would say yes. I would say yes, and I would also say no. I think I've seen a lot of movement to fighting stereotypes, a lot of questioning from the younger generation towards that.
So is it a generational thing? Is it about when people? Is it about when people happen to travel and the views that they had when they moved across? And
but it's a lot about displacement as well. You know, because that generation, the first and second generation, we have to remember, were moved and came rapidly across continent or continents to move to another country. So what they know is all that they know. But it's also about understanding it from their point of view and translating that through a language that they understand and that they know in a very constructive way. You know, you're not just saying, well, this is what it is, making the older generation understand why this is what it is and using reference points that they understand. So it's about putting it into a context. However, one thing that I will say is that I have found the older communities, so the first and second generation of communities that have come over from Africa or India, in all South Asian subcultures, not just the Gujarati community, as being more open to the LGBT community than, let's say, the third, fourth, or future generation. And that is just my experience. I don't know how that correlates with other fellow members of the LGBT community.
I just wonder whether, that's interesting. I've heard similar things before. I think there is something about age and about your views on life. You're just in a different sort of mind space as you head into the later years of your life.
I think it's a lot to do with tolerance. To be fair.
You've seen so much, you've heard so much, and that actually you've just come to appreciate the complexities of these things. And
although I don't like the word tolerance when it comes to the LGBT
because it implies a sort of a keeping at arm's length, but not saying anything bad.
But I think that those communities, when they first came to the UK or wherever, had to adjust their thinking a lot, and they just accepted what they saw. And again, as you say, maturity has a huge thing to play. But I think that the generation, or my own generation, or the generation below me, I'm third generation? So the third and fourth generation, I see a real struggle to change their own mindsets around it, because maybe they are more westernized, or they have a more westernized mindset. It's a battle to kind of make them understand about the fact that you can be LGBT and you can be South Asian and you can have a religion attached.
And there are issues there around sort of where are the LGBT role models within those communities who are, if someone is if someone is gay within that community, who are the role models they're really looking up to that sit within their own community?
Absolutely.
And I think it's very easy to be in a position where we start to assume that the white population in the UK, or the Western inverted commas population in the UK, is very tolerant around LGBT, and we're not as a population. It's very easy to sort of place these two communities, or a range of communities, against each other in their attitudes and say, well, we're this nice westernised community. We're all very accepting of different sexuality, and actually the reality is that large numbers of people in that community aren't. And large numbers of people.
There's a lot of unconscious bias when it comes to things like that. When it comes to things like that, and then
that's reinforced in a huge number of ways.
Yeah, and specifically when you think about politically what's going on at this moment. Not just in this country, globally.
Yes.
Dare I say it?
Yeah, we've said it.
That evil man, Donald Trump. Those. It's very easy to brainwash, can I say, or misinform people around that, and I think that has a huge part to play. I mean, when we think of these stories that have come in the past, like 1984, Handmaid's Tale, all that kind of stuff, there has to be some element of truth within how we see that as a future. And
complexity, nuance is a difficult thing to communicate, and simple black and white attitudes that says, these people are bad, these people are good, we don't want these people in our country, we don't want to accept these people, we don't want them in our military, whatever. Those are simple, straightforward messages that they work within a world based around sound bites and social media and 140 characters or 280 characters in a tweet. So there's that battle to get sophistication, nuance, complexity, communicated, and
I think there's a lot to say about kind of also
politicians are struggling with that.
But also because the Hindu religion I see hasn't been something that's non-imposing.
Yes,
it's more inviting.
Where does it sit within that?
Where does it sit within that?
Yes. It's not a religion that shouts loud about its. This is the only thing. This is the only religion in which to believe. Everything we believe is right. Everything you believe is wrong. It's a religion in which that diversity is valued, which kind of leads on to a sort of devil's advocate position about religion. So if you asked me in advance, I've now had this conversation with you, I've had a conversation with Sharanjeet from the Punjabi Sikh faith about religion as it relates to mental health and understandings of mental health. My initial reaction would always have been that it's likely to be a bad thing, coming at it as I am, as a kind of a skeptic when it comes to religion, or a humanist sort of viewpoint, very kind of scientific-based background, science-based background. Because religion, and you've already pushed back about this a little bit in terms of Hinduism, but religion as a concept is about having a set of fixed beliefs. And I know that that's not true of Hinduism in quite the same way. But fixed beliefs that come from either a singular source in terms of a singular book or a singular figure, and that any sort of change in our understanding of, say, mental health, or how brain science, brain chemistry works, how psychology works, or any sort of change in our attitudes relating to maybe a liberalisation of our views around sexuality, for example, is likely to come into conflict with religion, and is therefore likely to lead to an internal conflict in the people who are members of that faith, which has the potential to damagingly affect their own mental health. So push back and tell me why religion as a, I mean, you can localise this to Hinduism, but why religion is of benefit to people's mental health, or why it could be a benefit to people's mental health.
I think in regards to the Hindu faith, and this is probably relevant of all of the faiths, is that culture and religion or faith are very intertwined. And that's definitely the case when it comes to the Hinduism. One is not without the other. And there are a lot of things that cross over. And are synonymous, I would say, with one another. It's about separating them and understanding what actually is faith and what is religion and what is culture. The minute I started to do that, and by culture I mean stigma, by culture I mean stereotypes, by culture I mean society, and religion I mean faith, teachings, guidance, doctrines, I then began to be very clear about using faith and religion to understand and better my own mental health through beliefs and through teachings. And as I've already said to you, reading the book, Bhagavad Gita, and understanding it and subconsciously behaving in a manner lifted my spirits in a positive way already. And as a result, I became a more confident person about who I am, and I understood that not everybody is going to accept who you are and what you believe in and your way of life. But as long as you are comfortable with what you are doing and who you are, you can deal with a difference of opinion. I think sometimes we seek validation and we seek an acceptance by everybody, but that in reality is never going to exist.
No.
So
for anybody.
Yeah. So as long as you are of that mindset and you respect other people's opinion of you, just like you have to then respect other people's opinions in the wider sense, you automatically start to make that step change. The meditative and the kind of attempt to reach a higher plane for myself has really helped me clear my headspace in regards to negative thinking, in regards to almost beating myself up as to why something's happened or why something's not happened. And it's also given me a clear path in terms of dedicating myself to my work in a constructive way. So I think there are benefits, but you have to remove yourself from...
So you think there's a sort of a higher... If you had a message there, so the message would be for anyone of any religion who's struggling with the beliefs or the traditions or the cultural elements within that religion that place stigma upon a particular mental health issue or upon sexuality, is to re-engage with the fundamentals of that religion.
Because more or
to
less
look again and to make sure that your thinking is is open, that you've actually gone back to those fundamentals, and that your thinking is not entirely based just on those cultural elements that have come maybe from, that overlay, or from a particular type of, I don't know, religious leader within the community who has a particularly strong set of opinions about a particular issue. Yeah. But then instead you are properly engaged with religion with your religion at the right level.
Yeah, I think more often than not
at the learning level, rather than at the sort of the cultural tradition. Mm-hmm. I think
do's
more or less, and don'ts level.
What we always do, and what we always the easiest thing to blame when it comes to any issues, any stigma, is to bring it down to the core for religion.
Yes.
That's one of the easiest things to blame.
Yes.
And I think that, again, once you are able to differentiate what is a society-made rule in the name of religion, and what are the fundamental teachings or the principles or the doctrines of a religion, and you're able to sieve out and it's
a way of avoiding difficult conversations, I think, sometimes. It's, we can't talk about that because of the religion, or we can't work with that community because they have a particular religion and their religion says this, and therefore I think we're directly in opposition to them. Exactly.
I think that comes with confidence. I think first and foremost you have to kind of almost do that yourself and understand, even if you don't want to go out there and challenge the world, that's fine too.
Yes.
But having an understanding of what your place is within, or what your understanding of your place is within that, and it's going to be different for everybody else.
Of course.
I think that's really important. So I would encourage people to separate culture from religion.
That's a good defence. Okay, you rest your case.
Does that mean that I've won?
I don't know about that. I think we'll pass it over to the jury. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it is about taking the best of what religion has to offer. Yeah. In terms of understanding and trying to work out what is really genuinely important. How does all this relate to your work? So at the start of this conversation, we had this fantastic sort of description of all the things that you work on, community-based work, the dance, choreography, consulting around creative projects with other organisations. How does it all link up?
So Jaivant Patel Dance, if you like, sits at the top of a tree where I'm an independent dance artist, cultural producer, choreographer and creative consultant. And one of the many arms of that also sits a non-profit community organisation called Jaivant Dance, where we deliver and we offer community-based dance classes that explore the rich dance heritage of India to a community which is open to anybody, regardless of your background, your age, your sexuality, gender, etc., etc., etc. I'm just going to plug in something there as well. We have recently won the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service in 2017.
Fantastic,
for that, thank you. So going back to the top of the tree, if you like, when it comes to Jaivant Patel Dance, I am embarking on a tour in 2019 for a production called Yatra, which is a bill of Kathak and contemporary dance. So Kathak is an Indian classical dance form. And the evening looks at the rich possibilities rooted in LGBT plus narratives from the South Asian community.
So are you actually sharing stories relating to that in the form of dance? Is that what we would expect to say?
Yeah, I'm exploring that within the form of dance. Yeah. For example, the piece at the beginning is called Awakening, which uses Kathak dance forms and is choreographed by Naheed Siddiqui, who is a global experiment in Kathak. And more specifically, I think it's really about when growing up, I used to see so many representations about gender binaries, around gender fluidity, around intersex, that were all part of the Indian mythology, or the Hindu mythology, so some would say. They were acceptable on a par with most believers from the Hindu faith. but they were denied, I would say, to me, as a member of the LGBT community growing up. So I could never be that person. And I found that a really strange and interesting.
Harks back to that previous conversation about rerouting yourself in the traditions of the writings.
So I really want to explore that, and in the mix of that is my grandma's influence on me growing up in terms of faith, and how I grew from a very Vaishnavite tradition, so very Krishna, Vishnu doctrine, to a very Shaivite tradition, which is all about spirituality in the form of an energy or Shakti, which comes from Shiva and Parvati.
What do you think are the benefits of dance in general for people?
Oh,
as an
God.
art form, for people participating and for people watching?
For me, it is a breath of life. It informs me. I connect spiritually with myself and with my faith. I think for other people, it is uplifting. I think it's very empowering. I think you are able to self-express yourself and you lose all your inhibitions, and automatically that positive mentality that you gain from doing just that, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, whatever it is, feeds in automatically to your outlook on life. And you learn a lot about yourself, actually.
I mean, certainly, we've seen it a lot in HeadStart, and some of our commission providers, there's quite a number of dance-related activities happening around the city, and certainly that's reported back. That when we're thinking about mental well-being, emotional well-being, that we need to make sure that we're not just thinking in terms of sitting down and talking to somebody, or, I don't know, sitting with a counsellor. That actually it's about engaging with things that you love. It's about improving your physical health.
Yeah.
It's about increasing your confidence, and it's about having a creative outlet to express yourself.
Yeah.
And that all of those things have really positive effects on people.
Yeah. I'm just gonna get in there as well. I'm just gonna tell you. So the production of Yatra is going to be touring in 2019. It's a pilot tour. Dates and venues are to be confirmed, so look out for that. However, I can tell you that we will.
This is a world exclusive.
This is the world exclusive.
Okay.
We will be touring or I will be touring, should I say, to Birmingham in November 2019 and Wolverhampton Arena Theatre in 2019. The venue in Birmingham is the Midlands Arts Centre.
Yeah.
And please do come along if you can.
That would be absolutely fantastic. Is there anything else you want to tell us about? Any final words of wisdom?
Any final words? Just have confidence and just trust yourself. For any member of the LGBT community who wants to make that step change forward, I don't think that there ever is a right time for coming out or for shouting that out to the world, if that's what you want to do. So don't feel under pressure to do that. I think you will know when the time is right. And in the meantime, just surround yourself with positive people whom you can trust and whom are going to be there for you. And don't let anybody dampen your light.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jay. That's amazing.
Thank you.
There will be some links in the show notes and some example clips from some of Jay's performances, links into things like his Facebook page and other social media profiles. And thank you very, very much. That was a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.